everyone. Today is July 29th, 2018, and this is the Duel Assessment, your podcast for Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links. My name is Green Ranger.
And I'm Deck Tech.
And this is a week where we are prepping for the World Finals, which would happen next week. Some competitive esports scenes have replicated some of the game format, so we have some really cool decks from the MCS 10, which happened yesterday, to share. And some other duels have happened, which we will talk about their deck lists as well. Zane is finally obtainable, and we have the new Cyber Dark cards to talk about. And we also have other things to talk about, like new items and quality of life changes and new sales, things like that. And we also have the upcoming news for next month. So, Deck Tech, where are you now?
So, a little programming thing. This is our second try, umpteenth try, trying to record this. We did a whole episode this morning, and then something went wrong on probably my end. And so, we're trying it again because we love you guys so much. In terms of actually dueling this week, I've done not so much of that. I'm wrapping up like a series of weeks where work's just been really rough. So right now it seems like there's a little bit of a downtime in the game where the events are a little bit more leisurely. And I really appreciate that. It kind of lines up well because otherwise I wouldn't have been able to keep up. So I've just been kind of auto-dueling, the standard duelists, farming a little bit. I'm not quite done yet. And I just checked one of my weekly gem rewards is to duel 5 PvP games, and I've only done 3. So we're keeping it very light. Hopefully I'm going to be able to get some games in soon, maybe later today. There were some pretty cool decks that we're going to look at, so kind of getting a little bit of that inspiration.
Cool.
How about you? What are you up to?
Yeah, I've also played less ranked than normal. I did get up to Legend 2. That's because I was playing for hires, and the problem I'm not playing too much is because of the Fur Hire mirrors being everywhere in Legend 2, Legend 1. It's just really boring, frankly. And, as you'll see later, the Fur Hire decks are a bit different, but it's just facing the same thing and playing the same thing, and it feels like coin flips. Whoever, gets the good hand wins, things like that. And, but Zane farming, I was done really fast. I think I finished on Tuesday in the week, so I got through that pretty fast, and I've just been auto-dueling him just to get him up, to get his gems. I got his main gem rewards leading up to level 30, so I'm just getting his cards and stuff like that. So, yeah, not much to talk about here.
All right.
As mentioned in the podcast that didn't record, this is a friendly reminder to tell everyone to subscribe to our podcast. And tell your friends that we exist. Even if this is your first episode or your 72nd episode, please subscribe with any of your podcast searchers. Typically it's iTunes if you're using an iPhone, and it's Android. It's going to be a number of different things like Stitcher, Google Play Music, Overcast, Listen Notes, whatever. There's many different ones. Please subscribe, and you could even delete your episode right after you subscribe and download the episode. So just that'll be a great help to us.
Yeah, it helps people find us, and it helps us feel better with our fragile egos. Very important to keep us going, especially if we have to do 2 episodes in 1 week because we screwed something up.
Yeah. Yep. So please do that. Thank you very much. All right. We're going to get into esports, and the main tournament that happened yesterday, the big tournament, Duel Links Meta MCS 10, happened. And this is a very important one because the World Championships are happening next week. It's very possible the competitors here made some decks that would shape what decks show up in the finals. Here are some of the statistics we're going to read. Out of the top 32 standard decks. Oh yeah, just to mention, this tournament has some standard decks and some legendary decks, and the legendary decks are the ones that have certain stipulations of using required cards that kind of water down the deck, but it makes it more flavorful, and certain skills. And there are also certain stipulations in the tournament about which characters you bring, what skills you bring, and also how many cards you can use in each deck.
Yeah, you have to use a different character and skill for each of your decks, and your whatever card limits exist are spread across all of your decks. So you can only run 3 of most cards. You can only run 2 if the limited cards are 1. Um, the way that we did it when we did ours is we had the ban and restricted lists apply across all of our decks. So it would be like 2 of the semi-limited cards for all of our decks. So they're doing it a little differently. Gives them a little bit more power and options and stuff. So that's interesting.
Yeah, we watered ourselves down too much last time.
Apparently.
But the top 32 standard decks for hires came out on top, not surprisingly, but an interesting thing here is Amazon is pulled up as number 2. Previously, Amazonas and Masked Heroes were seen as the second place decks, but here we could see that Amazon is pulled way up ahead. Spellbooks became 3rd, and Masked Heroes are with Batterymen in the top decks. So they're kind of, they fell down a peg.
Yeah, and kind of like several pegs. If you look at it, we have the link in the show notes, but there were 27 for hire decks in the top 32. There were 18 Amazonas, 10 Spellbooks, and then only 3 Masked Heroes. So it's like a clear 1, 2, 3, and then just like a huge drop to everything else. There's just 3, 2, or 1 copies. So far fewer decks. I mean, there's just a clear top 3 decks, and then everything else is kind of the rest.
And of the legendary decks in the top 16, out of 32 legendary duelists, Cyrus came out ahead with 5 Fusion Reserve Roid decks, and second place Odeon with Endless Trap Hell, and third place Paradox Brothers with 2 3-star Demotion decks.
Yeah, and then everything else, there's only 1 of them. We're going to talk about these decks because the Fusion Reserves Roids was kind of interesting and new, something that we didn't really use or I didn't even think about when we were doing ours. So there's some interesting stuff to discuss there.
And it's funny how it's called Fusion Reserves, because they don't even fuse.
Yes. Yeah, that'll be one of the things to talk about, yeah.
So we're going to go over the deck lists of the top 4, and then also point out a few of the other interesting ones. First place, Tom V. Delzin brought Switcheroo Silent Magician Spellbooks. He ties Masked Heroes, Beatdown for Hires, and then the legendary decks were the Fusion Reserve Roid Yugiohs and the Endless Trap Hell Amazons.
Yeah, so I guess we could just go right away, start talking about the Fusion Reserves Roids, because that's probably the most interesting of these decks, I would say. The 3 standard decks are pretty standard, what you would expect from those decks, with very slight tweaks as needed to kind of fit with your various restrictions. But the Fusion Reserve Roids, well, first of all, Fusion Reserves is a skill that most of us probably aren't familiar with. And it says, can be used each time your life points decrease by 1,800. Add 1 fusion, oops, it cut off. Add 1 fusion material from your deck to your hand whose name is specifically listed on a Roid Fusion monster card in your extra deck. And so you can see the extra deck that this person's using is, the main one is Super Vehicroid Jumbo Drill, which lets him search out Steamroid, Drillroid, and Submarine Roid, which are just any of the 3. We assume that these are required. I haven't looked up the specific requirements, but these are the things that you have to build with your Cyrus deck, that you have to include, that is. And so the skill just lets you search out any of them that are still in your deck, and Drillroid's the strongest of the bunch because it actually has a little bit of synergy with the deck, and it's an okay card, whereas the other 2 are pretty much just used so that you can have good synergy with Ties of the Brethren. And Ties of the Brethren, you guys remember from Gear G, is a little while back, it was a little more popular. Pay 2,000 life, then target 1 level 4 lower monster you control, and it restricts your other special summons.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then it says you can special summon 2 monsters from your deck with the same type, attribute, and level as that monster with different names. So what you do is you get out one of these weaker Roids, and then you can Ties of the Brethren them, and then it just plays like a normal Gear Gia deck. Or alternatively, you can Ties of Brethren first and then activate your ability because it deals 2,000 to you, and then you get just a little bit of extra card advantage. And like I said, the Drillroid's like an okay card, so sometimes you just want it. And it's a interesting way to kind of make the best out of that limitation.
Right, yeah. They only cut out a few of the yugioh cards. I think they cut out 2 monsters because typically you run 3 of the anchors and then another arsenal. And yeah, there's definitely plenty of protection with Super Rush Headlong, Widespread Ruin, Pulse Mines, and Curse of Anubis in this deck. And we saw a number of people bring this Fusion Reserve yugioh deck into this tournament.
Yeah, it looks solid. The other deck that he has is Endless Trap Hell Amazonas, which is a deck that we see on the PvP ladder a little bit. The Special Duels format requires you to run, we're assuming 3 of the embodiment of Apophis, because there's 3 in all the lists that have it. And so, other than that, though, it's pretty much just your standard ladder deck that you would run. And so it's a powerful deck, and it looks very much like the ones that you would normally see. So that's kind of a sign that it's a good pick, because it doesn't have to be disrupted too much in terms of what you would actually normally just be running anyway.
Yeah, and we were mentioning in the previous episode how the embodiment of Apophis is a 1600, 1800. It's not good, but it's not bad. Like, a lot of the character decks force you to run bad cards, and this one just fits okay enough to pass by, I think.
Yeah, and it also lets you do, like, weird little tricks. Like, it gives you easy Amazon Queen summon. You can do stuff, which I do currently with the Amazoness Willpower anyway, where you can attack with the monster, and then you can use the princess and tribute the monster, and then instead of the princess's effect resolving while it's on the stack, then you can either resummon the monster with willpower, or you can summon with embodiment. And so even if you have a full board, that clears a slot for you so that you can then attack in with another monster, and it might help with your your OTK / finishing power, right? If you have this extra 1600 attacker sneaking in there. So it's not something that you would probably run on the ladder. It's not good enough there, but it definitely seems like a pretty solid pick for your legendary duelist slot.
Second place, Zarex 13, My Monster cards, Amazonas, Ties, Fast Heroes, Beatdown for Hires, Middle-Aged Mechs with Snipe Hunter, and the interesting deck Transcendent Crystals, Silent Magician deck.
Yeah, so before we skip to that one, though, I think we should talk about this My Monster cards, Amazonas. We're going backwards in time when we look at these decks, but the tournament results, I mean. But this deck kind of popped up in this past week, and it's a really interesting take on Amazonas. My Monster cards, again, it's a skill that maybe not a ton of people are familiar with. It's Yugimoto or Cyrus Drop, so one of them can pick it up, and it reads, if your deck has 6 or more level 4 or lower monsters with different names, you will have a better chances of having a level 4 or lower monster in your starting hand. So it's a little bit ambiguous as to exactly what those better stats are, but you run your 3 Princess, of course, and then you already were running Amazoness Swordswoman, so they kind of keep a couple of those in there. We're seeing Amazoness Tiger and then Baby Tiger. Those are already pretty common in Amazoness decks as well. And then you have like Amazoness Paladin in this version, which is just a solid, again, this is kind of a fringe card that's sometimes in Amazoness decks normally. And then the one thing you have that kind of totally rounds it out and makes the skill active is a Sphere Karibo or 2. And so by doing this, you are giving yourself an enhanced opportunity to get one of those monsters in your starting hand, and 30% of the time, one of those monsters is going to be the Amazoness Princess. So whatever the buff ends up being, 30% of that buff is the Princess, plus your just normal chance of drawing her. So it really ups your chances of drawing her, and it looks like, without having any specific math to back it, it looks like that might be, and presumably they're trying it because they think that it's the most consistent way to get Princess on turn 1, better than restart and stuff like that, balance maybe. So it's a nice, interesting twist on the deck. I'm glad to see that this deck has enough flexibility that people are still able to mess with it.
Let's talk about the Ancient Gears deck. So this one has the requirement of 3 cards, and one of them is Ancient Gear Golem, another is Ancient Gear Engineer, and another one is Ancient Gear Workshop. And if you remember from Special Duels, they had a different card list for Crowler, and I think it's because they found out that Ancient Gears were too strong with a second Ancient Gear Castle as a required card. So that's why they have the Ancient Gear Engineer now. And it was still good enough. I think Snipe Hunter definitely rounds out the deck. You could definitely toss some of the cards that you don't use. But this deck has a lot of protection in it. It actually works without Pulse Mines. They could have used Pulse Mines here because maybe they got confused about the rules like we did, where it's like 2 of each card across all decks. But there's no Pulse Mines here, and it actually did fine.
Yeah, we were talking about that, where it's just a really strong... I don't think he got confused because it works... Like, I think he specifically made that choice because otherwise he wouldn't have used his Amazon as with the Destiny hero, and there's other restrictions. So, anyway, I do think that Pulse Mines would work nicely in this deck. I think, like you said, Snipe Hunter works really well because if you're forced to run these subpar cards, you can at the very least use them as fuel for your engine of maybe destroying something. So this looks very similar to the decks that were just solid. I don't know. At this point, maybe it's been like a year or so, but back when this was meta, this was a very powerful deck. This was a meta deck, and it only looks a little different from what it did back then. So I'm not surprised that it's a pretty good choice.
And the most unique deck in this list, Transcendent Crystal Silent Magician. It forces you to run Rainbow Dragon and a bunch of crystal cards, but this one is really interesting. They have the Gravekeeper's Recruiter for special summon on Silent Magician, and then it tutors another Gravekeeper's Recruiter. And you pointed out a very interesting thing with Silent Burning, what they do with this deck and the other crystal cards.
Yeah, so I actually faced this deck on the ladder once, I guess maybe last week. It's a really interesting deck, and basically what you're doing, this is another one with the skill that people might not know. So let's start there. Transcendent Crystals, the skill is send 1 to 3 cards from your hand to your graveyard, then choose the same number of Crystal Beast Monsters from your deck as that number of cards, and place them in your spell and trap zone as continuous spell cards. The skill can only be used once per turn and up to twice per duel. So what you do, kind of the way the deck wants to work, is you use the skill to pitch Silent Burning, and then Silent Burning, it's kind of its secondary effect, but in this deck it's the main effect. When it's in the graveyard, you can banish it to add 1 Silent Magician monster from your deck to your hand. So you discard a Silent Burning to add a Crystal Beast monster and immediately get yourself your Silent Magician so you can get that train going. And then it's not even like a downside because the Crystal Beasts... Well, it's not a downside because you're using the card you discarded to your advantage. And then also the Crystal Beasts, you get the advantage of you're giving yourself fuel for Crystal Promise, which is a normal just magic spell card that allows you to essentially special summon it from your spell and trap zone, convert it into a monster. Or Crystal Reigeki, which is a trap card, which reads send 1 Crystal Beast monster from your spell and trap card to the graveyard to target any card your opponent controls and destroy it. So you're using the downside of the discard to either ditch one of your useless cards if you have to, like you just have a bad Crystal Beast in your hand, or alternatively, just as an easy free activator to your Silent Burning and to kind of just use it as a tutor effect. And it's a super cool deck. I think it's a good pick for this format, especially if you don't feel like running just spellbooks as one of your normal decks, because it actually seems like it's a really solid deck that instead of some of these other ones which just seem like weaker versions of the deck they want to be.
Yep, and the only downside is it costs $18.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, that's why I haven't tried it yet. I wanted to as soon as I saw it, but unfortunately the Silent Magicians are still a bit expensive.
Third place, Luke Tyler, Switcheroo, Silent Magician Spellbooks. This one has Spellbooks. Beatdown for Hires, and the Fusion Reserve Voids 23-card version. And as Luke only has 3 decks because only the first top 2 players brought all 5. Anyone who did not make it to the final match brought only 3 decks.
Right, yeah. And this looks, we already talked about the yugiohs. It's kind of got the same idea. It seems like one main difference is that he's running Powerful Rebirth, which is just a solid card in the deck. And he's also got some Paleozoic Canadias, but everyone kind of has slightly different protection cards in there. No Pulse Mines is an interesting choice, but I guess that's where he is. Other than that, the decks are the ones that we're kind of used to seeing. I guess the Switcheroo Spellbooks is a little interesting as well. We've only seen that once or twice. It uses Cosmic Cyclone as the activator for Switcheroo.
And it seems like the Spellbooks are moving away from those other monsters that they typically ran. That's something to point out, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think these very top players, they all have the Silent Magicians. I think the other versions of Spellbook are still fairly common for the rest of us because we don't necessarily have that. But if you have the Silent Magician, I think it's probably just better.
And another third place player, Soul Cardinal. Parasite Amazonas, Beatdown for Hires, and then the Dark Magician deck.
Yep, and again, the Beatdown for Hires looks pretty close to standard. I mean, there's a couple slots that people are messing with and tweaking. We talked about the Sphere Karibos. This one's running 2, whereas you were last week talking about how you went down to 1. There's also the Mayhem for Hire, which is another kind of debatable position, I guess. The Parasite Infestation Amazonas is kind of about what you'd expect from that version of the deck too. We've talked about it before, but Amazonas, it either is having like a renaissance or an identity crisis where there seems to be lots of different versions of it. And there's fairly standard builds with a few flex slots of each of the versions of it, but it seems like people can't agree just on which skill, which version is the best version of the deck. So that's that's very interesting to me, and I'm still going to keep playing it with these alternative versions around. So, but anyway, this looks like it's a good version for that. And the Silent Magician deck is just about what we would expect. It's kind of what we were seeing when we were building ours. It looks like, I would say, probably the trap cards. This version runs 3 Wall of D, 1 Paleozoic Canadia, and 1 Mirror Wall. Those seem to be the most flex spots of the whole deck, and then the rest is fairly set. And then one last thing to note is that Sergeant Electro is making a comeback. It is slightly underpowered in the current meta, for normal kind of constructed decks, PvP ladder stuff, but when you have these more restrictions, more restricted lists, then the relative power level goes right back up, and it's another solid card that we're seeing a lot of in these various legendary duelist decks.
Yep. Let's point out some other decks. The Restarted Emotion with For Hires and You Don't Know Me's deck.
Yeah, so the 3-star demotion, it's really interesting. The skill requires you to run one of each of the Gate Guardian pieces and then the Gate Guardian himself. I think the Gate Guardian's pretty much trash, but the other pieces are actually pretty solid. It's also only 4 cards, so it's not that disruptive. And the skill is pretty decent too. It reads, since it's gone through a few changes, even though people used to be familiar with it, they might not anymore. It can be used when your life points are 1,000 or below. Until the end phase, reduce the level of all monsters in your hand by 3. The skill can be used on Sujin, Kazajin, or Sangha, regardless of your remaining life points. The skill can only be used once per duel. So it works out a few ways for the deck, which I think is really cool. One, of course, is just if you want to just get out a 4-star Gate Guardian piece, these guys are just beaters, and you can just play them, and they're really solid. Another way is that you can use the Gate Guardian pieces as tribute summons to clear out space for more of your for higher shenanigans, right? Because sometimes you fill up your whole board and then you can't get more activation. So this is one way to clear out some space for you. And then the last way is that you have a couple monsters, specifically Wiz and Dinah, that you can you can normal summon this way after activating the skill if your life points are low. So it kind of works in all three phases of how you would use the various cards in it. It seems like it has pretty good synergy with the deck.
Miss Tiltine brought 3-star demotion with Amazonas. This is a 21 card deck.
Yeah, so again, it's kind of the same idea where you're using these flood the board decks have the extra monsters where sometimes you can just use an extra tribute. It's a little bit less the case in this deck that you need those extra slots so that you can get more activations, because that's not really how Amazonas works, but you also have a slightly less of the value of decreasing your other monsters, because the only other tribute monster is the Queen. So it has a little bit of less of an effect that way, but it has a much better natural effect of getting some value out of just pitching bad cards. Like if you draw the Gate Guardian, or if you draw one of the pieces and you can't summon it right now, you just use the Princess to get rid of it, and you don't need it. And it's kind of similar to the Snipe Hunter that we were talking about before, where you're making the best out of these cards that you probably don't want in your deck, but you're forced to use them. And so instead of actually playing with these bad cards, you can just use them as fuel. It works out pretty well.
Casey Full in the top 16 has a Fur Hire deck with 3 Blue Eyes White Dragons.
Yeah.
Same concept, kind of. It actually worked, so.
Yeah, and that's because the beatdown skill for Kaiba requires him to use the Blue Eyes, I'm sure. But yeah, like you said, same idea. You can clear some space for your monsters with it. You're doing all those special summons, so you're more likely to be able to tribute it than perhaps in some other decks you would be. There's not really ways to cheat it out. He's got 1 soul exchange. That might have been required too, I'm not sure. But otherwise, it's a fairly standard shell that you can kind of fit around any skill, I guess, and restrictions.
Top 16 player Hitman brought a balanced Noble Knights deck. As mentioned, this one is very expensive because you need the 3 Midrots and the 3 Tristans, but it's a very tricky deck. They protect themselves a lot, they have good synergy, and all they do is bounce and equip card around between the 2 guys and then the graveyard, and that acts as remove protection on 1.
Yeah, it's a tough deck, one that you don't see very often.
No. But when you face on the ladder, it's very tough because it's hard to get rid of their cards. It's just really difficult to get rid of their cards.
Yeah.
Bremskoltz brought Sealed Tombs, Gladiator Beast, and this one has one of each of the new Gladiator Beasts as well in the deck.
Yeah, which is cool. I haven't seen them yet, but like I said, I haven't played a ton of PvP anyway. But it's nice to see a comeback of the Glad Beasts. His version of it does have a lot of expensive cards, so I can't play this version. It's got 3 Canadia, 3 Floodgate, and 3 Wall of D, but it seems very powerful. Kind of has game against a lot of the top decks. You know, the Canadias and Floodgates are great against Fur Hires, and then Wall of D is great against most of the other stuff. And then once you get your little engine going, you're just as powerful as the rest of them.
QoL Day brought a stall deck that looks a little different than normal. I guess stall has been hit from the nerfs quite a bit. This is an Endless Trap Hell version with a bunch of banished cards as well.
Yeah, 3K all day loves to bring these stall decks. We talked about Endless Trap Hell. It requires you to use the Apophis, but it also just synergizes well with lots of powerful trap cards. The downside of running a 30-card deck in this sort of restriction is that you obviously have, like, it's using up these other cards that you can use in your other decks, but he thought it was worth it, and I think there's some of that surprise value is definitely worth something, because other people aren't expecting it, so they can't metagame against it or anything like that.
KW Rowe brought a Where the Heroes Dwell, which is basically a elemental hero deck. That's pretty much all it is.
Yeah. One of the funny things is that it has the elemental hero Wildheart, which can't be affected by trap effects. And so that guy's pretty decent against Amazonas.
I've seen this guy in a deck with 10 Kabuto Shen. It's just those two guys that are trap immune cards, and that's their deck.
Yeah, I saw someone bringing it. They almost got me because I was running Sea Stealth at the time, and I'm like, I have no answer. And he had buffed it somehow, so it was actually competing with my guys.
So that's all we're going to go over. It'll be pretty cool to see how the decks go next week.
Yeah, there's lots of good stuff here. We have the link, as always, to the whole write-up. We didn't want to highlight every single deck, but there are a lot of interesting choices here. So definitely make sure you check it out. There's lots of great stuff and lots of cool ideas for both on the ladder or if you want to compete in this format yourself.
And some of the earlier tournaments that happened in the week. Duel Meta Weekly number 30 happened on Wednesday, July 25th, and they were using the Worlds format kind of similar to the Duel Meta MCS. And here you can see the Fur Hires running away, 26 Fur Hires, and 18 Amazonas. You kind of see the those two go up ahead of the Masked Heroes ahead of time, so they are running away here. But in the top 16, Amazonas edged out Fur Hires with 11 compared to 9. So
yeah, I thought that was interesting. Yeah, the Fur Hires were the most popular deck in the tournament with 26 instances out of 72 players. Is that it?
Should be more than that.
Yeah, it should. Maybe this must be just a breakdown of the top 32 or something. But anyway, 26 out of whatever number, and then the next highest was Amazonas with 18, and then it switches once you get into the top 16. So I think that's pretty interesting. I'm assuming that either that's just within the range of variance or there's just enough mirror matches and a bit of hate to make the Fur Hires slightly underperform, but they're still obviously the deck, probably the top deck, if not the top one. Then there's definitely just two clear best decks. Jason
won first place. Jason is actually going to Worlds, so you have a top player here. Beat down Fur Hires and Switcheroo Silent Magician Spellbooks. This is the 2 Karibo version for the Fur Hires. No Mayhems and 1 Trunade. And the Switcheroo Silent Magician Spellbook deck is what you would see. That's a common deck you see with them.
Yeah, and you'll notice these decks they did this whole restrictions where there's only 3 copies between your 2 decks and you have to use 2 different skills and stuff, but they did not bring a legendary duelist deck, so these are all meta decks.
AC Full second place, beat down Fur Hires and Parasite Amazonas. The Fur Hire deck is a bit different. There's 2 Hate Trunades, which is pretty good, but then there's also 2 Mayhem Fur Hires, a card which you are seeing declining popularity.
Yep, those slightly different choices some people like. The Parasite Infestation Amazonas is, again, probably pretty similar to what you'd expect just for that build, with maybe some slight differences for whatever you are expecting to face. It has a little bit of Fur Hire hate, so he's definitely not planning to just lose that matchup. He is expecting to go up against them every once in a while, at least.
Stalling third place, beat down Fur Hire's 21-card version. This is a bit different. The main difference thing about this is that there's 5 combined Donpa and Recon. Typically, you go 3 Donpa, 1 Recon, or 2 each. This one has 5 of the little guys. And my monster cards, Amazon, this is the second instance this week. You'll see another one in the Duel Links Open. But kind of paving the way for the MCS, my monster card skill with Amazon.
Yeah, it's interesting. It has the same monster breakdown in this one, so I guess whoever ended up bringing it, I forget, in that tournament we just went over, liked this breakdown. It has a slightly different spell and trap breakdown, but it is a pretty open kind of, instead of targeting something, it's fairly open in terms of what it's trying to protect against, so that's interesting. It does leave... With the My Monster cards, you are essentially devoting 11 card slots to that, and then you have 3 card slots for your Amazoness traps for sure. Sometimes you run 4, and then so that only leaves 5 to 6 kind of slots for you to play with. So it's interesting to see what people put in those slots.
And Silverland, 3rd place. Beatdown for Hires, a very different version with Jinzo and a Monster Gate. Monster Gate is a card that I personally use, but it is a card that seems pretty, it's hit or miss. Sometimes it wins you a lot, but sometimes it's just in your hand. So that's where I stand with Monster Gate. And then another Endless Trap Hell Amazon deck.
Yeah, so this for hires is really interesting to me. I guess the Jinzo's against the Amazoness decks, and a little bit against the Treacherouses, but that Monster Gate's really interesting. It connects kind of. You have a 2, a 3, and a 4 in your Recon and your Scout, your Marksman and your Recon, and then you go to Beat and Seal, but it seems like probably it's going to be more like Dynas to Whizzes, maybe? Is that how you... Yeah. So...
Whiz to Dyna.
Yeah. That's what I meant. One of those two.
All right. So now we're going to talk about Duel Links Open number 8. This happened way back on Monday, 23rd. Same format as Meta Weekly. 12 for hires, 10 Amazoness in the top 16. So this meta was kind of set early in the week. Black Jesus, 1st place. Beatdown for hire deck. And my monster cards, Amazoness, the first reincarnation, but with a different monster composition here.
Yeah, so as far as we can tell from what we've seen, this is the first instance of the deck. So we'll give Black Jesus the credit of creating that until we see otherwise. Maybe it was discussed in the top player Discord or something like that. But anyway, his version does look a little different from the other 2 we've seen. Instead of running the Adult Tiger, it runs the Amazoness Fighter in that 1 monster slot. And the spell and traps are pretty different looking. It runs the 3 Amazoness traps that we were talking about, but in terms of the flex slots, it has 1 Cosmic Cyclone, 2 Widespread Ruin, 2 Paleozoic Canadia, and 1 Floodgate Trap Hole. So it goes to highlight that point that we were talking about before, where it's kind of just whatever you like and whatever you think will counter the meta you're expecting can go into those slots.
Bowler, 2nd place, brought Beatdown for Hire deck. And then a very interesting one, which we'll talk about, is the Banded Batteryman deck. And
yeah, so this is a really interesting deck. We heard about the Batterymen kind of being a deck to watch, but this is the first time that we're seeing it getting a top finish. So this is the first time that we, looking at these reports, are able to really see what the deck looks like. And the way that it works is it's built around Batteryman Industrial Strength, which is a UR from the most recent box. 2600 attack, 0 defense, and it reads, cannot be normal summoned or set, cannot be special summoned except by removing 2 Batteryman monsters from your graveyard. And then its kind of standard effect is once per turn, you can remove from play 1 Thunder type monster from your graveyard to destroy 1 monster and 1 spell or trap card on the field. So the Batterymen are Thunder types, but there's you can also have other thunder types to work on that kind of static effect. And one of the key ones is Thunder Seahorse, which is another UR from that same most recent box. So this is an expensive deck that you're going to have to buy through that most recent box 3 times to be able to play, which is a little bit unfortunate. But its effect is you can discard this card to add 2 light thunder type monsters of the same name with 1600 or less attack from your deck. You can use this effect once per turn. You cannot special summon the turn you activate this. So we looked at the deck, and the only target is another Thunder Seahorse, if you want to get 2 more of them, or Batteryman Solar. And Batteryman Solar is, like I said, level 4 Thunder effect. It's 1500, and it reads, if this card is normal or special summoned, you can send 1 Thunder monster from your deck to your graveyard. If a Thunder monster is normal or special summoned while this monster is on the field, special summon 1 Batteryman token 0/0. You can target 1 Batteryman effect monster you control or in your graveyard. This card's name becomes that monster's until the end phase, and you can only use each effect once per turn. So this card, it lets you continue the cycle where you're putting things from your deck into your graveyard. It also lets you get a little bit of defense with the tokens. It lets you take the name of another monster, but now that I'm reading it, I think I got it wrong in the first recording. So good thing we ruined that one because it only takes the name, not the effect. So
I think I messed that up with one of the Amazons. Like whoever becomes the queen.
Mm-hmm.
I think I messed that up once. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then the last kind of interesting piece to this deck is the Batteryman Microcell, which is a level 1 Batteryman Thunder Light, 100, and it's a flip effect monster. Flip, special summon 1 level 4 or lower Batteryman monster from your deck except Batteryman Microcell. After this card has been flipped face up, when it is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, draw 1 card. So you get to draw a card, it's nice, it replaces itself, but then it also special summons your Batteryman Solar. So you can kind of get that engine going. When it's special summoned, it does the graveyard thing. So pretty much every card in this deck, all the monsters except for the Sphere Krivos, are all just like cycling each other and themselves and filling up your graveyard so that you can get it going right away with the Batteryman Industrial Strength. And then all the rest of the cards are just to kind of stall so you don't get OTK'd while you're setting up your guys. But once you get going, you're special summoning things for free. You're destroying 2 for like zeros because you're just banishing something from your graveyard for the effect. And it's just a huge card advantage that your opponent's going to have a lot of trouble keeping up with. So it's a really cool deck. I wish I could play it, but buying through the box 3 times is a big woof. So
yeah, you brought through that box enough to know.
Yeah.
And Momoshe, 3rd place. Parasite, Amazonas looks pretty standard, and Beatdown for Hire looks pretty standard. Yay, 3rd place. Restart. Oh, we haven't seen Restart in a while. Restart, Silent Magician, Spellbooks, and a Beatdown for Hire deck.
Yeah, I think that's the thing to note about this one is that Yehei's stuck with Restart, whereas other people were trying out other skills to make the deck work. After the nerf, we haven't seen it much. It might still just be the best skill, so this is kind of the classic build, I guess.
That is all for esports next week, hopefully. I don't think we'll get to report on the finals because we don't know when that will actually end, but these are the decks leading up to the finals.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how much it translates over. It seems like the MCS was still like super wide open, so I'm going to be interested to see exactly what all the top players bring, what they think performed the best out of all these things that we saw. There's kind of, we've talked about it before, but 2 theories as to what you want going into something like a World Champs, a really high-level tournament like that, where sometimes you want a really settled meta, and then sometimes you want a wide-open meta. And this is interesting because we get a little bit of both. It seems like the normal PvP decks are very settled. It's a very clear first best, second best deck, and then kind of the third deck is one of just 3 choices, basically. So that is all very set, but then the legendary duelist portion is all wide open. There's so many options, and lots of them aren't even the obvious ones. So it's really interesting to see. It's actually kind of cool. We get a little bit of both in this tournament.
Yep. All right. So we're going to move on to Zane. And any event is getting scrutiny nowadays, and this one isn't safe from that either. Many people are upset that Zane does not give us Cyber Dragon, which is a free 2100 basically. And we're getting a Cyber Dark set, but it's not even the full set. It's been watered down itself. So it's not going to be competitive as it is. At least we get a new character, we get some gems and some cards. And speaking of gems, don't forget to complete the event-related missions of playing Cyber Dark cards. You could do it against a level 10 duelist, and you'll get somewhere south of 100 gems for doing it.
Yeah, it's great. I've already forgotten to do it multiple times, so you should remember.
And farming techniques, Deck Tech mentioned he used a legendary fisherman farm, which he used for Crowler, and it basically locks them down with the legendary ocean, which makes a fisherman 4-star and spirit barrier. So that's how that goes.
Yeah, once you lock him down, he has no way to kill any of those things, and he can't attack or deal damage, so you just draw through your whole deck and then use your favorite finisher after you've set that up.
And I used the Cloudian farm it gave me the opportunity to use cards I've never played before and did not know the names of. And you summon your Cloudian turbulences. You use Sanctuary of the Sky and Spirit Barrier to protect your life points. And the turbulences don't get destroyed, so that's their benefit. You play continuous spell called Cloudian Squalls that gives a fog counter to everything on the board. And then your finisher, which is Imbus Man. Imbus Man gets X attack for every fog counter, so it becomes over 10,000 and you hit into something, and then that's the game. So, pretty good.
Nice. It's always fun when you can do a new, different farming technique. Like the one that I was using was cool because it's easy. It's something I'm familiar with. I can just do it. It's a deck I already had and everything. So that was nice, but it's also really cool and interesting to try something new and some cards that we don't even aren't familiar with at all.
Yeah, it gives you some satisfaction to know that the card's not completely useless.
Yes, yeah, there you go.
So let's talk about the farmable drops that you get from Zane. He gives you the Cyber Dark set, not all of the cards, and the main card is the Fusion Cyber Dark Dragon, which you fuse from Horn, Edge, and Keel to base 1000, 1000. Must be fused. When it's special summoned, you select a dragon from your graveyard and equip it. This card gains attack equal to the dragon's attack. It also gains 100 attack for each monster card in your graveyard. If it's destroyed in battle, the equipped monster is destroyed instead. So, the problem with this card is that it has anti-synergy with the other 3 parts that it fuses with. But you're basically just getting a big guy with battle protection, and at this point in the game, that might not be good enough.
Yeah, I'm just not very excited about it. It's a lot of resources to devote to less of an impact than a lot of the other stuff that you can do at this point in the game.
The next 3 cards come in a set, so it's Cyber Dark Horn, Edge, and Keel. They're all Dark Machines with 4 stars, 800, 800s. They all have the ability of attaching a level 3 or lower dragon from your graveyard to them, and they gain the attack. So they come as a base. Let's say you're using Hunter Dragon. I used to say Hunter Dragon all the time because that's the best 3-star or lower dragon we have in Duel Links in 1700 normal monster. So these guys become 2500. Horn does piercing damage. Edge can attack directly, but it's half the attack. And Keel's the worst one because it only inflicts 300 damage upon destroying a monster. And all these guys come out as a 2500, but they only have battle protection. They don't have effect protection, and there's that setup of getting the Hunter Dragon in the graveyard to play these cards.
Yeah, so obviously if you could just play a 4-star like 2500, that'd be broken. Everyone would play it. Um, and it gets this little bonus effect that makes it evasive or, deals a little extra damage, but the setup means that it's not just a 4-star 2500, and by the time you've like set it up, it I'm just it doesn't seem like it's worth the setup, even though the payout's pretty good. It's not like mind-blowing good, but once you have to start setting something up, you kind of need something a little better. This seems like you're talking about it. It reminds me of what we were just talking about with the Crystal Beasts, where you can pitch it as part of like your cost and you can get some benefit out of it. But having a 2500 just isn't as good as getting that Silent Magician out. So
I think when I was trying to get my reward, I played 3 Order to Charge with 3 of the Hunter Dragons.
There you go.
Using it, but I just kept bricking. Like, it was really hard to summon these cards.
Yeah.
Cyber Dark Impact is a spell. It's basically a polymerization. You get to fuse your 3 Cyber Dark cards into the dragon, but it's a little easier because you can use them in the graveyard. That's what this card does. Ruthless Denial spell. Select 1 monster you control and send it to the graveyard. Send 1 random card in your opponent's hand to the graveyard. So this is hand disruption. Hand disruption was never a thing, but you can use the monster that has a negative effect. It's just taking up space. It has a positive effect upon death, or a monster that you stole the enemy controller. So you could just kill your opponent's monster and discard a card from your hand.
Yes, that's like the ultimate power play right there, right? Regardless of whether you end up winning or anything, you've just like broken their spirits and shown your cojones like, I am dominant over you.
Cyber Ouroboros is a 100/600. When this card is removed from play, you can send 1 card from your hand to the graveyard and draw 1 card. This card looks pretty bad. You've got a neutral effect of discard and draw. Worst of all, you have to remove this from play and run a 100/600 in your deck for no reason. So, really bad card.
Yeah, probably not worth anything.
Lizard Soldier is 1100. If you want to run that in your Cyber Dark deck, it is a level 3 dragon. That's if you don't have your Hunter Dragons. And missed a bunch of cards. This worked.
Yeah.
Okay, level up cards. Zane's level up cards are the Cyber Dragon cards, not the Cyber Darks. Cyber End Dragon is basically a fusion of 3 Cyber Dragons. That's 4,000 with piercing. Crowler's Ultimate Ancient Gear Golem beats this out of the water because it has piercing and then it brings back an Ancient Gear Golem, so there's no reason to run this card at all.
Bummer. Yeah.
Cyber Phoenix, 1200/1600 machine. When this card's in attack mode, negate any spells and effects that target 1 machine monster you control. When this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, you can draw 1 card. I like this card. It's a little utility card for any machine deck. It provides protection and it helps you draw a card.
Yeah, it's a really cool card. The problem is the weak body, but I like all the effects. It's a maybe.
Yeah. Cyber Network, continuous spell. Destroy this continuous trap. Destroy this during your 3rd standby phase after activation. Once per turn, if Cyber Dragon is on the field, you can banish 1 light machine from your deck. When this is sent from the field to the graveyard, special summon as many of those banished light machines as possible. And if you do, destroy all spells and traps you control. Monsters that are special summoned by this effect cannot activate their effects. You cannot conduct your battle phase in the turn you activate this effect. So basically, try to get out a bunch of light machines from your deck, banish them, and special summon them for something big. Just gets 3 guys on the board, but it's awfully slow.
Yeah, it's incredibly slow, and it's even conditional, like, on top of that. So this is the type of thing that only really exists in the show or, like, on YouTube videos or versus maybe farming opponents and stuff, but you're not really ever going to be able to pull this off in PvP.
Evolution Burst, normal spell. If you control Cyber Dragon, target one card your opponent controls and destroy it. Cyber Dragon can't attack during this turn. So it's like Psychokinesis. It's pretty good 1 removal. But the problem is we do not have the real Cyber Dragon. We have to use some stand-ins.
Yeah. So it's like that condition is kind of a big bummer condition.
One of the stand-ins, the best stand-in we've got so far is Cyber Dragon Dry, which is an 1800-800. When this is normal summon, you can make all Cyber Dragons you control become level 5. And not special summon any monsters during the turn you activate this effect except for machines. If this is banished, you can target one Cyber Dragon you control. It can't be destroyed by battle or card effects this turn. This card's name becomes Cyber Dragon. So it's just an 1800 Cyber Dragon that you can use to activate your other abilities. I think the previous one we had was 1500, so this is an upgrade over that.
Yeah. Which is, it's now at least serviceable.
Yeah. It competes with most things on the board.
Yeah.
And the last card, Future Fusion, continuous spell. During your first standby phase after this card's activation, show one fusion monster in your extra deck and send their fusion materials from the main deck to the graveyard. During your second standby phase after this activation, fusion summon one fusion, the one that you showed. And when this card leaves the field, destroy the fusion monster. When the fusion monster is destroyed, destroy this card. So it's like a slower version of Cyberstein, in that you could cheat out a fusion monster 2 turns later.
Yeah, so we were talking about this, like, 2 turns is a really long time. I guess Cyberstein decks tend to either kill you on their very first turn or kind of stall you out for a long number of turns and then kind of grind you out and kill you that way. So it's, I guess some of the times it has the same effect, but still, without that OTK potential, it just feels so much weaker. And even Cyberstein doesn't really see much play, despite the fact that there's very specific things set up in this game to try to help it exist. It really only saw play for the most part when we had that 5,000 life points, so I don't know. I don't think this is that good.
Forgot to mention, I actually lost the one in Legend, like during this week.
Was he Legend 1 though? Yeah. So he's just playing whatever he wants. But yeah, so one of the other, and I don't even remember which one it is now, but one of the other characters that's not Taya also has life cost.
Mako.
Oh, Mako. Yeah. So it's a trick. If you're not paying attention, you're like, where did this come from?
I thought he was just letting me win. Zane's skills, Cyber Style, controllable ramp skill. That's interesting. When your life points are below 3,000, you can play one Proto Cyber Dragon from outside your deck for every 1,000 life points below 4,000. The skill can be used once per duel. So if you're below 1,000, you can special summon 3 Proto Cyber Dragons on the board for your attributing pleasure.
Yeah, and like you have, if you're under 2,000, then you can summon 2 and use them to immediately do a tribute summon for almost any monster in the game. So it's kind of like the new 3-star demotion, which is kind of like the middle of the 3-star demotion nerfs. So that's kind of cool. I always liked playing big things, and the 3-star demotion was fun, so maybe.
No Excuses is a skill. If you're below 500 life points, you can add a Power Bond from outside your deck. Power Bond is basically a fusion card that inflicts damage back to you at the end of the turn, but it doubles the attack of your polymerized target. And I think the goal of it is to get something with piercing. So you get some kind of like Parasite-Groid, Ultimate Ancient Gear Golem, or Jumbo Drill, and then win that turn. Because you're going to die afterwards if you're below 500.
Yeah, I think that's the point. But I don't think it's very good. Like, the fact that you can only use the skill to kill people means that a lot of games it's not going to help you at all. You're just going to lose without it. And then getting to 500 life is really low and hard to do. Even getting to 1,000 can be pretty rough, but 500 is a very tight window.
Yep. In Fatal 5, it's the meme skill where you have a monster attacks 5 times in one turn, you win. We're not sure how this is going to get pulled off, but we really want to see it.
Yeah, I'm super looking forward to the first person who can make it happen. Send us links and stuff if you see it on YouTube or whatever.
Do it yourself.
Yeah, well, yeah. If you could make it happen, then you're getting the shout out. You're also getting a shout out if you can send it to send us someone who did it. But if you do it yourself, then mad props.
Even against a standard duelist, like I have no idea how it could happen. So, yeah, try to do it. All right, there are new items called boosters, and these items make PvE games easier, or they either make the game easier from extra cards or extra conditions, or they make the duel system better.
Yeah, or experience. So one of them saves you from dying. One of them gives you a free powerful card from outside the game. One of them gives you an extra 1,000 duel assessment, and the other one gives you bonus experience. So these are really cool. The thing that I was saying about them is like you don't, in most cases versus PvE, you don't need these effects. You're just, auto-dueling the standard duelist. You don't care about them, or you have a very specific plan versus the event duelist that's coming around, so you don't really need it for that. And you don't want them in PvP. That would kind of ruin PvP, but that seems to be the only duels where like they would have a significant effect. So it seems like it's not the most useful item in the game to me. But you pointed out that it's one of the few things that we can actually buy from the EX trader with, if we did a proper job farming, then we don't need any of the other stuff he's offering. So I guess it's something.
Better than gold. Yep.
Yeah, better than gold.
And reopenable packs and sales. There's a lot of sales going on in the store, and a new for money purchase of reopenable packs, which lets you basically send all of the packs you bought in that purchase for another reroll.
Yeah, this is pretty cool. You buy your 3-pack set, and you don't get that SR you were chasing. You could try again, and of course there's a chance you might end up getting even worse packs, but you're still, if you're chasing something specific, then it's still better because you're getting yourself closer to it, or you're essentially in the same spot that you were before, but you at least had a second chance. So it's a cool thing. I always thought it's a bummer that Konami seems to only have sales and specials, events and stuff like this almost always only if you spend money, which seems kind of weak to me. But if you're willing to spend money on the game, if you're the type of person who likes to put in a little money when it's worth it to you, then this seems like a cool way to search out specific things that you're looking for in sets.
Yeah, it's definitely advisable if you're at a low denominator, like if it's only like 10 or 15 packs left in the box or something like that. You're getting close.
Yeah.
And 2 quality of life changes of things that we seldom use. Changes to the global chat. So there should be fewer spammers now because you need to be stage 5. We were talking in the previous podcast that didn't make it, how we don't really use chat, and it's kind of toxic, so we don't like being there.
Yeah, and I also think this change took way too long for them to implement. I thought that this should have been in place like from the get-go. I'm pretty sure we talked about it in like episode 1 or something, like really early on. But now that it's been so long that everyone has just learned that you can't go into chat because it's all filled with bots and spammers and stuff. Now no one's in there because I went to check to see if this had an effect. And first of all, it appears that some of the bots were just raised to stage 5, and that's probably not very hard to do. I don't remember, but I'm pretty sure I did it in the first day of playing. So they can get around it fairly easily. And second of all, there's no humans in there because everyone's already learned that there's only bots in there. So it's really unfortunate. I wish that it were, more active, and I think that there were ways they could have done that, but I think waiting this long was a bad move.
And there are improvements to spectator mode and dual replays in that it's not called you or your opponent, and that you actually have your name tag on it.
Yeah, in case you forget which one you are. Or, not really. Really, it's so that if people watch, it makes for a better third-party viewer experience, but...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Finally, we're going to wrap up with some upcoming news. As mentioned, the YCS finals are happening next week, the 4th and the 28th of August. And, of course, it will be streamed on the app somehow.
Yeah, we were talking about this. It's kind of weird. We're not exactly sure how they're going to do it. My expectation is that the thing that's going to be on the app is actually just going to be a link to the stream. But it'd be cool if they were somehow, like, I don't want them to block out the app, like you can't open it and play. But it would be cool if there were a stream in the app or something, I guess. It's kind of interesting.
Open up a projector in the app that takes up some border, shows the game.
Yeah, I mean, that'd be sweet if you could just flip between screens and one of the screens is like the stream. Except then it'd be tiny, but I don't know. Well,
it seems like that technology's not here yet.
Yeah, probably not.
I mean, it's 2018 and we still don't have this technology.
It would probably
Should
cause
be here by now.
Lots of crashes.
Duel-a-thon's coming back early August. Duel's Challenges are back after a really long layoff. They're kind of like the Duel puzzles. Serious Chaz is back mid-August. I think he got delayed a little. Yami Merrick is added to the gate mid-August, so his event appears to be over, the Battle City event. There is a tabletop Dungeons and Dragons or Dungeon Dice Monsters type RPG event going on, which should be the first appearance of Duke Devlin late August. What do you think about that?
I'm ready for some Duke Devlin. He was one of the main characters that I remember from the show that didn't end up like making it so far. So that's kind of cool.
Yep. His buddy. Oh wait, never mind. KC Cup is happening August 29th to September 10th, and this appears to be the first KC Cup for the next year, which is 2019. So.
Yeah, if they're
in advance here.
Yeah, we'll see if they're doing the same thing, but this could be like a way to get invited to 2019 World. So they're starting up right away.
Actually, the person who wins this forgets, like they stop playing Duel and then they get invited all of a sudden out of the blue.
Yeah, hopefully Konami sends something more than just an in-game announcement.
Yeah. Late August, Tristan is back. Hopefully his cards are a little more useful this time. We'll see. There are new decklist features in late August. I believe it's something like you get to build your dream deck or something. And you work towards, you see your progress towards building that dream deck or something like that. It's like a wish list.
That's cool.
And mid-September, we finally get Bell. So this is like a month and a half in advance, but we are getting a new character.
Nice. Yeah, and the last thing, I wanted to remind people to use your tickets. I check every once in a while, and this week I noticed that I have not only the end of the month normal rollover ones, but also some of them, I forget what they were for, but they're expiring on like August 4th or 5th or something. So definitely make sure that you're using them as they come so that you're not just wasting them.
Yep, great reminder. All right, so that's going to be it for us today. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to us. Check out the podcast and more at our website, theduelassessment.wordpress.com. Facebook, we have a Facebook page, facebook.com/theduelassessment. If you want to help support our work, patreon.com/duel_assessment. Email us with any questions at theduelassessment@gmail.com. Or you can find us on Twitter, duel_assessment. Me at Green Ranger CCG, TechTech at HS TechTech.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from you guys, and we'll see you guys next time.